Welcome to my economics channel, where I love discussing the subject, but most importantly, I love to make it something interesting and fun to learn. And in today's episode, I want to discuss something which, on the surface, seems rather banal and actually comically easy to answer, but is actually surprisingly deep, and will actually get into the heart of one of my favorite subjects in economics, and that is banking. And the question for today's video is, where do profits come from? So I'm drawing my evidence from a paper of the same title. So we might start off with something like this. We might say one business makes a profit because after all of its expenses are paid, regardless of how they're categorized, what they're called, does not matter. After all of those are paid for, if there is money left over, then we call that a profit. And we can imagine that these profits, these financial profits, they come from somewhere within the economy. You might almost imagine something like grasping, you're sort of taking from somewhere, you're taking from somewhere in the economy. And on one level, this visualization sort of makes sense. We have to pay for things, and that payment gives businesses profits. We can imagine if there's two businesses in an economy, we can imagine that one business makes a profit only at the expense of the other business. So therefore, one business is in deficit and the other is making a profit. It's in surplus. However, as this paper asks, where do profits in the aggregate come from? How does every single business sector in the economy make money? How do they all make profits? And this matters because it's very fashionable to bash rich people, and in particular Bill Gates, who was briefly once the world's richest man. It's easy to imagine that he took, or if you're feeling less charitable, he stole that money from other people and then accumulated that wealth for himself. Because it's hard to imagine that these profits could come from anywhere else other than something that already exists. Because what already existed was the money that we paid to that corporation. And in this case, it was Bill Gates and it was Microsoft. However, where profits in the aggregate for every single business sector come from is growth. New growth, which those businesses caused. During the course of a day, a week, a month, or a year, businesses engage in certain activities and they create new things. New goods, new services that we can now experience, ones that did not exist previously. And this is where profits are drawn from. Profits aren't drawn from the existing part of the economy, because indeed that would then be self-consuming. That would be like a snake eating its own tail. So even something as banal, on the surface at least, as a cafe making a coffee, that actually counts as new growth. That coffee which is made is something which did not exist in the previous day. It's a new experience. If that cafe did not make that coffee on that day, that is a coffee you could not experience. And ultimately, these new experiences are what we care about. But we can actually go deeper. I said I would connect this to banking. And so it's easy to imagine banking in the same vein. They take savings which already exist and then make loans from those savings. However, precisely the opposite happens. Banks create loans first, this then creates deposits, and those deposits are our savings. So then how does all of this tie together and how does all of this work? So clearly, for the first growth that happened with humanity, we didn't need money. Money didn't exist, but growth did. Clearly, hunter-gatherers, which were improving their hunting tools and indeed engaging in artistic endeavors, didn't need money. And it's why it's intuitive to imagine that banks take savings that already exist and then make loans from these savings. Because growth doesn't actually need money. So one of the theories on the origins of money says that it came about because of marriage. Two people would get married and their families would become involved, and you'd have a dowry and you'd have gifts involved. However, instead of exchanging gifts and dowries directly, you exchange money, which would then be used to purchase gifts later. So you're transferring ownership, but at a later date. So if this is accurate, clearly we didn't need money for the first cities. You could create your own housing, you could start your own plots of land, you could start farming without money. And this makes sense with a close, tight-knit group of people. You have what you might call social credit. You remember what you owe to someone, and you then remember what others owe to you. And between the group, you might have something akin to a shared balance sheet, with assets and liabilities, or simply what someone owes to you versus what you owe to someone else. So stick with me because this actually gets super interesting. So then let's start growing our cities. Clearly it's not possible to remember everything that you owe someone and that others then owe to you. You then need money to then transfer payments between strangers. Between people you know, you still use social credit. However, the more you start interacting with strangers and the more that you start using money, the more that you start relying on money. Therefore, if we then get to a situation where we get thousands of people living in cities, it then makes sense for money to be a daily occurrence and something that you interact with on a daily basis. It then starts to make sense to consider loans. Let's imagine we have a situation where there are 10 things, 10 goods and services in the economy which can be consumed. And there's also 10 units of account. Just for the sake of simplicity, let's say each good and each service is then valued at 1 unit of account. So 10 for 10, that makes sense. Let's say a new good and a new service are then introduced into the economy. However, the units of account do not increase. So there's 2 new things to experience and for a total of 12. However, there's only 10 units of account. We can imagine a new equilibrium where the price of everything goes down to accommodate the fact that 2 new things exist and we want those 2 new things to be purchasable. So because supplies increase but nothing else has changed, prices go down. And this on the surface might seem like a good thing. We all want to pay lower prices for things. However, consider, where are those prices going to? We can imagine there's a few businesses in this economy which are producing the goods and services. If those businesses then suddenly have to lower their prices because the goods and services they are selling have gone down in price, they are then going to look to cut down their costs. One of their costs, of course, is employees. So the prices go down, that means they also pay their employees less. Now you as an employee are getting less, that means you have less money to spend. You then spend less money into businesses. Businesses receive less money, they then pay their employees less, and we get into a vicious circle. And in general, this is why a deflationary cycle is a bad thing. However, with the introduction of those new goods and services, those 2 extra goods and services, let's introduce 2 extra bits of money, an extra 2 units of account. So therefore we have 12 and 12. And now this is precisely where we want to be. Because everything is purchasable, however the amount of money, the units of account has also gone up. So this is actually a subtle point. In this example that I gave, the goods and services went up first, and this makes sense because goods and services can increase, the amount of wealth in the economy can increase without money, and then money increased after the fact. However, it's important to remember, if the amount of goods and services goes up and the amount of money doesn't change, we can create problems in the economy. What if we do the opposite? What if the amount of money goes up first and then the amount of goods and services goes up? This is precisely where new credit and banking comes in. And it's precisely where growth and profits come from. Loans come first. Credit comes first. So in our example, with 10 units of account, you expand to someone or a business, you expand an extra 2 units of account, new money in existence. They then use that new money, those new units of account, in the course of their business. They will then produce those 2 new goods and services, those 2 new things that we can now enjoy. That is how we grow the economy on the aggregate. And this is why the traditional story of banking is just not interesting. Aside from the fact that it's got the wrong notion about the economy, it also puts you in the wrong mindset. And this is ultimately why we care about credit and credit conditions. Because ultimately, new credit, which is being created by banks or simply the financial system, will eventually go into creating new things for the economy. Even if that something new is you taking out a loan so you can get an extension on your house. That extension is something new for the economy. If someone else buys your house, they're buying the whole house and they're buying that new extension. If you did not put that extension in, that is something that person, that buyer, could not experience previously. And this is why we want the stock of money to continually increase, because inevitably it will lead to new things, new business ideas, new goods and services being created. Simply put, new experiences that we can enjoy. And it's something that in the past century we've come to expect. And this is why we pay so much attention to the credit cycle, to the business cycle, and to banks, and of course, to central banks. It's why central banks have taken center stage recently. We care how credit is allocated because this will determine the path of future growth, and it's something that all business sectors in the economy will share in. And this helps explain how, as pointed out in the paper, business profits have increased every single year in the US since 1933. And it's why, despite the recent hiccup due to COVID-19, profits and growth will continue into the future. And in particular, profits and growth in the aggregate. And it's why we will continue to enjoy new things into the future. So this video has summarized how, in the aggregate, business profits can increase year on year and they can do it sustainably, and how this ties in with banking, but ultimately credit, and how credit growth comes first, and that is then used for new growth, new things in the economy, and it's why it creates the impetus for new growth to continue in the economy. You can almost think of it as a self-sustaining machine. Previous profits, previous growth spurs on new profits and new growth. So yeah, hope that was helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask below and I'll do my best to answer, or I'll put the questions together for a video into the future. So thank you for watching. Subscribe, rate and share all the good stuff. It definitely helps my channel, and I'll see you guys next time.